Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. There's a bit of a bandwagon going on, isn't there? Because it was the first anniversary of the Procurement Act regulations on the 24th of this month. Yesterday, I think, was the birthday. No, 2 days ago even. I can't remember what day it is. That tells you something about what the last year's been like. And Go for Growth also has been focusing on what the changes have looked like for smaller businesses and voluntary sector organisations. So welcome to the webinar this morning. I'll just do some quick housekeeping and then I'll introduce my colleague. The session, as always, today is being recorded. So a copy of the recording and a copy of the slide deck. So everything that you see will be sent out after the event today. We are drawing effectively on 3 data sources for the presentation today. So there's our combined intelligence and information from YPO and from Go for Growth. But there are also a couple of reports that have gone out recently. So the Federation of Small Businesses did a report on small businesses in the public sector called Signed, Sealed and Delivered. And the Tussell report on procurement and public sector frameworks for 2025 came out at the back end of last year, early this year. And so we are pulling on some of that data. What I'll do is both of those reports from FSB and Tussell are in the public domain. When we send the slide deck out, I'll send links out to both of those reports as well. So if you want to drill down into any of the stuff that we talk about today, you can have a look at it. We do have a big agenda. So we've got 10 things to try and get through. So we will be rattling through at some pace this stuff today between myself and my colleague Annalise. So I will always say, as I do at the top of all of these sessions, if anybody wants to have a more detailed conversation, or if the pace is a little bit too fast today, our contact details are on the last slide. So please do feel free to get in touch. We are here to help. So if you do want to drill down into anything else, you absolutely can. So my thanks to Tussell and FSB for the reports that they did, but my big thanks to Annalise from YPO for joining me again today. So I think this is something like the 4th or 5th webinar we've done together, Annalise, and I'm always super grateful for you taking time out of your busy day. Let me really quickly just tell you a little bit about Go for Growth. If you've been on one of our webinars before, this will probably be known to you, but for anybody that's new to us, Go for Growth are a social enterprise. So we're a business for good. We're driven by impact. And our job effectively really is to try and sit in between the public procurement community, the contracting authority community, and the marketplace to try and help sustainable growth of smaller businesses and voluntary sector organisations navigate and translate the public procurement landscape. We're all about sustained impact through growth of local economies, social and environmental impact as we go. There are no closed doors in Go for Growth. So wherever your organisation is, whatever sector you're in and whatever size you are, if you need some help, you can come to Go for Growth and we'll do everything that we can to help you. And we are funded by public sector organisations. So all of the support that we offer to the marketplace is delivered free of charge. So there is no cost barrier to getting that support either. So that's who we are. I'm Gillian Askew. I'm one of the co-founders of Go for Growth. I am a procurement professional by trade. This is my 31st year in procurement. I obviously started when I was about 3, because I'm that young, but it feels like actually there's been a lot of change over those 31 years in procurement, both as a profession and in public procurement, and we're going to talk through a little bit of that today. Annalise, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Jill. My name's Annalise and I'm a contracts officer at YPO. You'll have to excuse my croaky voice today. I've got a bit of a cold. So YPO stands for the Yorkshire Purchasing Organisation, and we were formed in 1974. We're one of the largest public sector buying organisations for education, and whilst we are based in Wakefield, we do cover the length and breadth of the UK and have frameworks in place to meet the whole of the public sector needs. Our customer base includes areas such as educational establishments, including schools, colleges and universities, nurseries and childminders, blue light services, including fire, ambulance and police authorities, charities and social enterprises, NHS trusts, local authorities and central government and ministerial departments such as the MOD and HMRC. We have over 30,000 customers, and We've got experienced field sales and procurement specialist teams that support our customers. Our range includes 23,000 products and over 100 frameworks. So whether it's pens, paper, computers, furniture, or even things like electricity, food, and insurance, we can help customers get the best deals around. YPO is 100% publicly owned, self-funded, and not-for-profit. So everything we do is about giving back to the public sector and providing effective solutions to public sector organisations. In 2024, YPO celebrated its 50th birthday, and since the dividend scheme started, YPO returned over 164 million to the public sector through member dividends. As an organisation, we're also proud to have achieved a 98.2% customer satisfaction rating in the Institute of Customer Service latest ratings. So that's YPO.
Perfect. Thank you, Annalise. So if we kick off, what I will say as well is we have carved out some time for questions at the end if we can. If you do want to put questions in the Q&A or the chat as we go, please feel free. Annalise and I will keep an eye on it. If there are any questions in there that we don't get to, we'll answer them as the slide decks come out as well. So please feel free to dip in if you want to. But if we start with context, because it really matters, the public sector has £407 billion worth of spend. That's for years 23-24. That's central government, NHS, blue light, education, actually all of those markets that Annalise just talked about. And arguably it's a pretty big marketplace. But if you contrast that with the SME statistics, so small to medium enterprises represent 99.9% of UK businesses, but only around 20% of public sector spend. And that gap's really important because it tells us two things. It tells us that access isn't yet proportionate. So despite years of policy intention, the spend distribution doesn't yet reflect the structure of the business population. But secondly, the opportunity, therefore, remains huge. So if even a small percentage of that spend shifts, it represents serious growth potential for that SME marketplace. The reduction in the number of small businesses invoicing the public sector since 2020 is also telling. So that reduction suggests consolidation, that few suppliers are actually winning more work. And the fact that the median contract values for micro and small businesses haven't grown indicates that smaller suppliers aren't necessarily scaling within the public sector markets once they enter. Now, I want to be really clear because that can sound a bit doom and gloom. I'm not saying that smaller businesses should stop applying for opportunities. I'm actually saying the opposite, but it is about clarity. I think the Procurement Act 2023, what it hasn't done is suddenly flip a switch overnight. So legislation alone doesn't rebalance markets. Actually, what drives that is cultural change, commercial confidence, internal buying behaviour. Those are what the drivers are for real change, but they, of course, take much longer. The legislation, the regulations, if you like, they provide the baseline, the benchmark, the mechanisms, the levers in which we can then affect this change. So what does that mean for smaller organisations? It means that public sector growth isn't accidental. It requires us as smaller organisations to think strategically and very purposefully about what we want from the public sector. It requires understanding about routes to market. And it requires choosing where to focus rather than bidding for everything. So it's a structured intent to the market. And once you understand that structure, actually, you can work within it instead of feeling blocked out by it. And if we talk about the experience of bidding, and I'm drawing quite a bit on the Federation of Small Businesses intelligence for this, 81% of small businesses will prepare bids in-house rather than using an external bid writer. Now, that would usually mean that's a director, a founder, a small leadership team doing it alongside the day-to-day delivery of that business. I know in Go for Growth, when we are undertaking bids, primarily because of my procurement background, that would fall to me with support from my colleagues. And I'm already engaged full-time in running our business. So fitting bidding in isn't easy for any smaller organisation or voluntary sector organisation. 35% report that submitting the same information repeatedly is inefficient and frustrating. And actually, of course it is. I don't know that anyone would argue with that. But the new digital platform, the central digital platform, which is also known as the Find a Tender service, is definitely trying to address that through the supplier information profiles. And over time, what we should see is that duplication should reduce. So what you put in the supplier information system in the central digital platform will pull through to the individual procurement portal that you are bidding through. And that could become even more meaningful for smaller businesses where we're bidding under threshold when the Find a Tender service and Contracts Finder hopefully merge, and there could be a supplier information system for under threshold opportunities as well. So I think we accept that actually this has been a problem and a frustrating one, but what the regulations are trying to do, and actually underneath the threshold, there is activity that is trying to address that. 43% of businesses suggest that eligibility criteria shuts them out of opportunity. And I think the take on that is that this is where proportionality really matters. Insurance levels, turnover requirements, accreditations. Sometimes the requirement is absolutely justified, and it might just be that you need a better understanding of why that accreditation, that license, that level of insurance, that type of insurance is being asked for. But sometimes there are also legacy settings that haven't yet been challenged. The thing to note in any procurement opportunity that you're looking at, you will have a clarification process that allows you to ask questions. So if you are being asked for an accreditation, more often than not, it will say or equivalent. Or if you have an equivalent, you can ask a clarification question around it. If you have an insurance level that is different to the insurance that has been asked for, you can ask a clarification question around it. Don't ever be afraid to ask questions around it. And then on feedback, only 5% reporting adequate or meaningful feedback, and that is definitely not a healthy statistic. However, I would imagine, and I'm making an assumption here, but I would imagine that that would be below threshold opportunities, because above threshold, where the regulations are actually regulating the procurement competition, there is something called an assessment summary that is mandated that has to go out. So detailed feedback must be given if you're above whatever threshold applies to your procurement. So if that's goods and services in wider public sector, that would be 207,720, including VAT, total contract value. If you're above that level, you will get detailed feedback. So my assumption is that where there's a lack of feedback, that would be below threshold. That doesn't make it right, but it does mean that we are working with the public sector to see how we can make that situation better. And that's all about actually how can we learn and improve if we don't know what we are missing out on or what our gaps are. There's an important shift under the Act. So transparency obligations are getting stronger, and Annalise is going to talk a little bit more about that. Buyers are under more scrutiny. Exclusion and evaluation decisions are more visible. Notices are more detailed. That doesn't remove all of the friction straight away, but it does give us as a marketplace more visibility, and therefore more grounds to question the need, the requirement, and also decisions really constructively. But I guess the bigger point here is, if you're a business that sits in that 31%, if you haven't won anything in 3 years, it doesn't automatically mean that your offering isn't strong. What it might mean is you could be targeting the wrong route to market, or it could mean that you're bidding at the wrong level. And so actually, if that's something that is familiar to you or resonates with you and you want to chat with Go for Growth about that, let's explore that together. But it doesn't automatically mean, because you're not winning, that you're not doing the right things. It might just mean that the process isn't quite matched to your service or your offering. Annalise, I think this is you, isn't it?
It is, yes. So we know that the landscape of public procurement is shifting, driven by new obligations that place transparency at the heart of how contracting authorities operate. So under the Procurement Act, there are 17 notices available to publish. Some are voluntary, but others are mandatory, like a contract details notice. The shift is designed to open up the procurement process, giving suppliers clearer visibility into opportunities and decisions that were once difficult to track or understand. So whilst this does create extra admin from the contracting authority's perspective with the volume of notices that needs to be published, it also gives suppliers greater visibility into decision making. Importantly, transparency now extends beyond traditional open tenders, so framework call-offs, often seen as closed-door processes, are increasingly subject to the same scrutiny, with notices that need to be published explaining the decision-making process when calling off a framework. So for businesses, this means richer and more consistent flow of information across all procurement routes. And the result is a more level playing field where suppliers can better understand how and when opportunities arise. With improved data availability, businesses are far better equipped to make informed decisions about where to focus their time, energy, and investment. So instead of relying on instinct or fragmented insights, organisations can analyse trends, anticipate demand, and align their capabilities with real market signals. This shift from guesswork to evidence-based planning is becoming a competitive advantage in its own right for suppliers. Another major development is the rapid growth of preliminary market engagement notices, often called PMEs. Buyers are engaging earlier and more frequently with the market, signalling future need and inviting dialogue before formal procurement begins. For suppliers, this creates valuable opportunities to influence thinking, help shape requirements, and position themselves long before the tender is published. So at YPO, PME is usually a mandatory activity, and we will engage with the market to look at things like what supplier accreditations you currently hold, what the insurance limits are, what social value you're delivering in the market, so we can try and tailor our procurements that are best suited to the suppliers as well as customer base. At YPO, the outcome of PME engagement is always referred to in the procurement documents, setting out what it has achieved and how we've used PME. So taken together, these changes enable businesses to move beyond just reactive bidding. With richer information, earlier engagement, and greater visibility across the procurement cycle, organisations can adapt a more strategic approach to business development. Instead of chasing every opportunity, they can prioritise the right ones, build stronger pipelines, and plan proactively for longer term growth. However, also bear in mind that there are some frameworks and DPS agreements which still continue to be available to call off under the old Public Contract Regulations 2015, where the old regime still exists for notices. But hopefully over the next 4 years, these will fade out and be replaced with procurements undertaken by the Procurement Act 2023. So any call-offs from a Procurement Act 2023 framework, you will have that additional notice information and decision-making process.
Perfect, thank you. And actually, if we think about those routes to market, and Annalise is right, and we'll talk a little bit more about DPS's dynamic markets and open frameworks in a second, but we do have twin track of legislation running, so the Public Contract Regulations 2015 and Procurement Act 2023, and the notices that need to go will be governed by whichever piece of legislation governed the procurement, and that's based on when it was actually first initiated in the market. But the Tussell report that I'll send out around frameworks really talks about them being central to public sector buying. There has been a shift with how popular and prevalent frameworks are in the public sector market. So between 2019 and 2023, frameworks and DPS usage increased dramatically. In 2023, over a quarter of public sector contracts contract value went through a framework. In some sectors, particularly IT and professional services, if you're not on a relevant framework, you might not even see the opportunity because the opportunity will be run through a further competition just to the framework providers. So frameworks aren't an optional background noise. Actually, they are a strategic gateway. And historically, the issue with frameworks was lockout. So if you missed a framework submission window, you were out for up to 4 years. And for a small business, that's commercially significant. Now, I'm not going to steal Annalise's thunder talking about open frameworks, but open frameworks do change that dynamic. They do allow new suppliers to join during the lifetime of the framework, and that does reduce lockout. So contracting authorities can still choose which type of framework they use, closed or open, but there is now this open framework mechanism that can be used. However, and this is the practical reality, frameworks still require investment to join. They are competitive, and actually being on one doesn't, in and of itself, guarantee the work. And there might be direct award capability in there. The terminology has shifted between the two sets of regulations, but you might not have to go through a further competition to be awarded work, but you will know in the framework what those capabilities are. You may still have to win call-off competitions. So if you're thinking about frameworks as a smaller organisation, what should your framework strategy be asking you? So you should ask yourself, I guess, which frameworks do our target buyers actually use? Because they might not be hosting the framework, but they might be using the framework. Are we positioned at the right lot level if there are lots on that framework? Are we in the right places on a framework? Do we have capacity to respond to these mini or further competitions? And I guess the overarching message is it's not about joining everything. It is about joining and applying for the right ones. Annalise.
Thank you. So dynamic markets introduced under the Procurement Act 2023 replaces the former dynamic purchasing system, which we probably all know as DPSs. The new dynamic markets expand the scope and flexibility. So unlike DPSs, which could only be used for commonly purchased off-the-shelf goods and services, dynamic markets can be used for any procurement of goods, services or works, allowing for far greater versatility. They remain permanently open to new suppliers, include no limit on the number of suppliers that can join, and you are required to publish a dynamic market notice to ensure transparency. Dynamic markets use the competitive flexible procedure for awarding contracts and act as a pre-qualification list, enabling only eligible suppliers to participate. The most significant distinction between a DPS and a dynamic market is that a dynamic market can only be used for above threshold call-off spend, with the sole exception of use by schools. So under the previous regime, DPSs could be applied to both below threshold and above threshold procurements, offering wider flexibility for everyday, low-value purchasing. However, dynamic markets are explicitly restricted to higher value procurements and cannot be used for below threshold call-offs. This change creates a clearer separation between routine, low-value purchasing routes and more complex, higher value procurements, while still allowing schools an exemption to maintain flexibility around their smaller scale needs. The Cabinet Office is still investigating ways to fix this issue, and it will require primary legislation to do this. Now, we've not been told that anything is on the horizon in relation to this, and I think the information coming out from Cabinet Office is that if you are wanting to create some kind of supplier list where you can do low threshold spend, it has to be through an open framework. So many MSMEs and VCSEs previously viewed the DPS model as an accessible and low barrier route into the public sector supply chains, largely because it allowed continuous entry and supported lower value routine procurement activity. The shift to dynamic markets removed the creation of the new DPS arrangements, which may reduce the number of straightforward entry points for smaller organisations. However, the impact is softened by the fact that existing DPS arrangements will continue to operate and accept new supplier applications until February 2029, meaning MSMEs and VCSEs still have several years in which they can actively join a DPS and benefit from similar smaller procurement routes whilst adapting to the new dynamic market environment. Customers can still actively call off DPS arrangements by running a further competition. So open frameworks can be reopened during the lifetime of the framework and need to be reopened at least twice once in the first 3 years and again in the remaining 5 years. And this is what's been classed as the alternative to the below threshold call-off spend, is putting in place an open framework. And moving on. Okay. New tools have been introduced to support suppliers and contracting authorities to navigate above threshold procurements under the Procurement Act. The central digital platform, which is delivered through Find a Tender service, now acts as a single location for all above threshold public sector opportunities. This consolidation simplifies the supplier journey by ensuring that bidders no longer need to track multiple platforms to identify relevant contracts. So, for example, previously you used to have to look at Contracts Finder as well. So hopefully this will make the process of transparency easier to engage with. The central digital platform has also expanded its functionality by hosting the new supplier information system, which has streamlined how organisations provide their core credentials and keep their information up to date. This system reduces duplication and makes it easier for suppliers to maintain a single, consistent profile that can be used across multiple procurements. And importantly, the central digital platform now accepts collaboration and consortia information, enabling groups of suppliers, particularly SMEs and VCSEs, and specialist providers to combine their strength and bid collectively for opportunities that they may not have been able to pursue individually. Access to the CDP has been simplified. Suppliers do not need to register to search for opportunities, which supports open visibility of the market. However, registration becomes mandatory when suppliers wish to submit bids, especially bids for over threshold procurements. This ensures that engagement with live tenders is secure and auditable whilst keeping the discovery phase open and barrier-free. PME notices and opportunities are also issued on the central digital platform to allow organisations to find out more information prior to a tender. And I think you can actually search on the central digital platform as to what you're actually looking for. So you can search just for PME activity if you want to find out more about a tender before it goes live. A major change on the horizon is the integration of Contracts Finder into the central digital platform, which was originally planned for October 2026. Once merged, this will mean that all above and below threshold opportunities will be accessible through a single platform. This represents a significant step forward towards full digital unification of the public procurement landscape, allowing simplified supplier access. However, the Contract Finder merge may be delayed further as further development work on the CDP is prioritised. So we are now showing on the latest the latest timeline that we have from the Cabinet Office regarding transforming public procurement timeline is that it's to be confirmed is the date for the Contracts Finder merger into the central digital platform. We've had further statutory instruments laid in Parliament for Section 70 amendments to the Act. So from April, there is now a requirement for all suppliers awarded a regulated under threshold contract. So these are contracts that are worth above 30,000 including VAT, but below the threshold amount, to be registered on the central digital platform as a supplier. So this doesn't mean that as a supplier you need to complete all the core supplier information, although it is strongly encouraged that you do so. Instead, suppliers will need to input details of their organisation, which should be a straightforward process, and obtain what is called a Public Procurement Organisation Number, often referred to as a PPOM. Buyers will no longer be able to award a contract without checking that a supplier is registered on the CDP first. So this is a significant shift from April this year. This year will also see the publication of the payment compliance notices and the contract performance notices. So from the 1st of October 2025, contracting authorities must issue a payment compliance notice within 30 days of each of the fixed 6-month reporting period. Now, the first reporting period ran from the 1st of October to the 31st of March this year. These detailed notices the payment compliance notice will give details about how promptly invoices are being paid during that 6-month period, including the average payment times, the percentage of invoices paid within the statutory time frame. And the first notice is expected to be issued within 30 days of the 31st of March this year. So that is classed as the first reporting period. So by the end of April, we should have details on contracting authorities on payment compliance. Similarly, for contracts with an estimated value of over £5 million, including VAT, contract performance notice must be issued at least annually during the lifetime of the contract and again at contract termination. This notice will cover supplier performance over the relevant assessment period against the KPI set out in the contract award notice and detail any breaches or significant failures to perform. As the Act is now just over a year old, we can expect to see some contract performance notices being issued this year. And there's a link on the bottom as to how to register on the central digital platform. So we've got this information from the government commercial function, and these are the numbers so far as at the 2nd of February this year. So we have over 69,000 suppliers registered on the central digital platform, and of those, 428 consortia are registered, which is really positive to see. There are over 3,300 contracting authorities registered, and nearly 59,000 notices have been published. There has been over 13,000 UK4 tender notices issued and nearly 7,000 contract award notices issued, which is great to see, and over 21,000 contract details notices issued, which will contain both above threshold and under threshold awards. However, you will probably note that there's only been 26 dynamic market notices issued, which is very low compared to some of the other notices that have been issued, which kind of signifies that we're not seeing many dynamic markets coming through the system. So this year we are going to see the introduction of the UK17 payment compliance notice and the UK9 contract performance notice, which should add more information into the public domain. However, interestingly enough, there is still nobody on the debarment list for the most serious supplier exclusion offences. And I'm not expecting that we're going to see anybody on there anytime soon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Annalise. So we'll talk about quality and social value, and probably the most encouraging shift for smaller organisations and voluntary sector audiences. Quality and social value now dominate, I would say, the majority of procurement procedures. In many competitions, non-price criteria carries more weight than cost. So providers years ago, and still to this day, have either experience or perception that it's the fastest race to the bottom, but actually that is shifting. There was something called the most economic advantageous tender, and actually that shifted to the most advantageous tender. And the signal to buyers was that actually, whilst price still matters, public money must demonstrate value for money, but value in and of itself is much broader than just the financials. So buyers are being asked to demonstrate the outcomes of those procurements, the impact that that procurement will make, both socially from a community perspective, for the environment, how innovation will be flowed through that competition. And that aligns really well with smaller organisations because we're often closer to delivery. We often know those communities really well. We're a part of those communities. I think one of the things that we learned through the pandemic was that actually there is a level of agility in smaller organizations. We can and do adapt really fast when we need to. And we can often, well, we've often already embedded social impact naturally rather than retrofitting it. But I guess there's a critical difference describing our intentions. And the additionality factor really matters. So it's not always about what we already do, but about what more we can do, and often in a local environment. If we're successful in winning the contract, we'll need to show what we'll deliver, how we'll deliver it, when we'll deliver it, what measurable difference it will make, and how that aligns to the buyer's priorities. Annalise, I think this is you, isn't it?
It is, it is. So at YPO, we're still seeing a lot of tenders come through where suppliers are just not understanding who a connected person is and who an associated supplier is. This is new terminology under the Procurement Act. So under the Procurement Act, a connected person is anyone who has a major control or strong influence over supplier or someone the supplier itself strongly controls. So it works both ways. Think of it as people or organisations closely tied to the supplier in a way that could affect how the supplier behaves. Connected persons are usually directors, parent companies, sister companies, for example, or you could be part of a wider group, and it's that wider group that you might share policies, and that wider group might dictate how you operate as an organisation. They would be classed as connected persons. Now, a supplier can be excluded from a public contract not only for its own wrongdoing, but also for the actions of a connected person. So if a parent company key shareholder or influential director has committed a disqualifying offence and the risk is ongoing, the supplier may also be excluded. Now, the idea, I think, is to stop suppliers avoiding accountability by restructuring, renaming themselves, or hiding behind individuals who aren't officially on the books. Now, an associated supplier under the Procurement Act is someone the supplier relies upon to meet a condition of participation, such as the required skills, qualifications, capacity, or experience. It is someone the supplier relies upon to perform the contract itself. So this could be classed as a key subcontractor delivering major parts of a service. It can include subcontractors, delivery partners, consortium members, or anyone else who plays a significant role in the ability to win and deliver the contract. A supplier can be disqualified because of the behaviour of a partner they rely upon and not just for their own behaviour. So, for example, if a key subcontractor providing a required specialist service has committed a disqualifying offence, the supplier could also be excluded. But if the subcontractor is not essential, i.e. doesn't provide a critical service or isn't being relied upon to meet the condition of participation, they may not be classed as an associated person, so their misconduct won't automatically affect the supplier. So crucially, associated persons can be replaced, and the Act requires contracting authorities to give the supplier a chance to swap them out before excluding the supplier. As a supplier, you must declare these relationships accurately on the central digital platform and on the Procurement Pacific questionnaire you fill in. And also note that associated suppliers are required to register on the central digital platform and complete their core supplier information. As an organisation, you're expected to know how your corporate family tree works, and it should match publicly available information, such as those at Companies House. Failure to declare an associated or connected person at worst could be grounds for exclusion, or at best could result in potential delays for clarifications to the procurement. So we've had to raise a lot of clarifications already at YPO for connected person information not matching those available at Companies House, where it's showing a parent company, but it's not listed as a connected person.
Brilliant. I think it is a really complicated area, and the public sector are seeing the struggles that I think bidders are having of all sizes. So, if this is something that you want to talk more about, please do get in touch, and we'll try and help all we can. We've a couple of slide left, and then we'll open up for questions. Procurement accessibility is always a two-way responsibility. So, as suppliers to the public sector, there is a responsibility on us to be capable and prepared. But buyers must also design competitions proportionately. So, if a buyer sets a 10-day deadline for a complex service specification, that almost inadvertently would favour large incumbents who have resources that are armed and ready to respond. If insurance levels are disproportionate to risk, it could inadvertently exclude capable smaller providers. If feedback is generic, suppliers can't improve, and without improvement, the market stagnates. So the Procurement Act reinforces the principles of transparency and proportionality. Buyers are being encouraged, and in some areas required, to justify their approach. And that preliminary market engagement should test those assumptions. It should test that proportionality and eligibility criteria. It's one of the places and mechanisms there to check the capacity, the capability, and the context of the market. Asking ourselves as buyers, is this turnover requirement necessary? Is this contract better structured in lots? Does the evaluation criteria reflect what actually matters? Will it deliver the intended outcomes? And well-designed lots can unlock SME participation without compromising delivery. So the system works best when buyers genuinely want a diverse supply chain, not just when the policy says they should want that. And encouragingly, many organisations are moving in that direction. Progress, however, depends on that continued challenge and constructive dialogue between the marketplace and the procurement community. So where does this leave us? The Procurement Act was never going to be a silver bullet. Legislation in and of itself isn't a magic answer. It hasn't instantly redistributed spend or removed all of the barriers. Legislation sets the rules, but culture, commercial confidence, internal governance, they all evolve more slowly. However, I see it as both a provider and a procurement practitioner that change is happening. Transparency has improved drastically in some areas. Data is more accessible. Digital systems are consolidating. Open frameworks do reduce that structural lockout. Quality and social value are weighted more seriously. And it might be an incremental progress that we're seeing, but it is progress. And so here's the forward-looking point, I guess. Markets shift before the spend shift is seen from that market. And the organisations, therefore, that understand the direction of travel early, those who invest in positioning, in evidencing their requirements, in the framework strategy, in digital readiness, will, I guess, in some ways, almost automatically benefit first. So maybe we shouldn't be asking, has the Procurement Act fixed everything? Maybe the better question is, how do we align ourselves with where procurement is heading over the next 5 years? That's where collaboration, support, and smarter strategy come in. And there's lots of support out there, and not just from Go for Growth and YPO, but from contracting authorities themselves, other organisations like us, Federation of Small Businesses, chambers, etc. There is a lot of help and support out there. So if you want to start thinking about how do we align with the direction of travel for procurement over the next 5 years, you don't have to do that in isolation. You don't have to do that alone. And that's a great segue, actually, into the last slide, which is just our contact details. If you do want to have more conversations, if you do want to delve further into how can I navigate the procurement landscape over the next few years, and how can I really make that count for my business, get in touch. All our contact details are on here. You can go to YPO's website. You can go to the Go for Growth website. We've got a short course on the Procurement Act, which is free to access, and the link will be in the slide decks when it comes out. And we've got lots more events like this as well. So please do feel free to get in touch with us if we can be of any help. And we are at time, so I will just stop sharing for a second and check if there are any questions in the Q&A or the chat, which there's not. we went through a huge amount of information this morning. So two things. We hope that some or all of that was helpful. But what I've said a few times is this is big. It is a super tanker turning, so it takes time, but it is moving and there is progress. So there are reasons to be super optimistic, I think. If you want to chat about any more of that in any more detail, do get in touch. Our doors are always open. Thank you to everyone for joining us. I know everyone's got really busy calendars. So thank you for that. I agree that the increased admin and risk burden doesn't always recognise the pressure that procurement teams are under. And we absolutely get that. Annalise lives that every single day. And there's no extra resources in procurement. So this two-way street is respectful of each other in terms of we are all trying our best here to navigate this big new piece of legislation and make the best of it for our markets and for each other. So we are trying to be as collaborative as we can. Finally, my thanks to you, Annalise. I know you're super busy. So as always, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate your support and guidance. And hopefully we'll see everyone on another Go for Growth webinar sometime soon. Thank you ever so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.